Hey, it's Ash here from being SWENGLISH, and I'm in lots of Facebook groups, particularly one called Swedes Back Home, which is a really good group. I'm not Swedish, but this group is all about Swedes who've lived abroad and have decided to move back to Sweden, which, although I'm not a Swede moving back to Sweden, it was still a very relevant group for me because it contained people who had been abroad and were coming to Sweden. Many cases they'd been away for a long time, and so their scenario wasn't dissimilar to mine. Now, one of the most common questions I see in that group almost every single day is, how do I move my money from the UK to Sweden? Now, you might think that this is a simple answer, right? You speak to your bank and you just do it. But you'd be making a grave error if you did that. And there's two main reasons for that. The first one is the exchange rate. Now, banks try to be competitive, but the reality is that banks cannot compete with these new online banks. And by online banks, I mean the likes of Revolut and Wise. Wise used to be called TransferWise. They are both invaluable if you're moving abroad to Sweden, but not just for the actual move itself. Even if you're commuting back and forth and while you actually live in Sweden, they are both brilliant. Now, that's the first reason. Exchange rate is key. If you're moving £10,000 or £100,000 from the sale of a house, for example, it can mean the difference between £1,000 or £100 difference depending on the exchange rate. Banks just can't compete. I've spoken to lots of banks before I moved my money when I sold my house. None of them could get close to the exchange rates offered by Revolut and TransferWise. By the way, there's links to both of these brilliant apps below in the video description. The second reason is fees. Now, when you join up with Revolut and Wise, become a premium member. It doesn't cost a lot and you can cancel it at any point. But as a premium member, you won't pay any fees at all to transfer money from a UK bank account to Sweden and even the other way around. Now, with a high street bank, they will always charge you a fee. It may not be a lot of money in some cases, but the wire transfer operation generally costs money. Another reason, as I mentioned, is even when you're actually in Sweden, it's still really handy to have these apps. The reason is I monitor the exchange rate. About 6 months ago, it was around 11 krona to the pound. Now it's about 12.5 krona to the pound. So what I tend to do is move money back and forth. So when I see that the exchange rate is really favourable from moving English pounds to Swedish, I move a bit more. When I see it's the other way around and it's really low, I move from Swedish back to UK pounds and just leave it there. The benefit being that when I travel to the UK for a holiday, I can use my Revolut card to spend money abroad. That way you also avoid terrible exchange rates whenever you travel on holiday. Because if you use for example, your SEB card in the UK, you're going to be getting a really bad exchange rate. Whereas if you use Revolut and you buy something that costs £10, it comes out of your UK pot on the Revolut account. Therefore, there's no exchange rate involved at all. So as a quick summary to that section, massive benefits to using Wise and Revolut. Exchange rate is far better than banks, regardless of what anybody tells you. And also the fees are either minimal or none at all if you become a premium member of those two services. Now, a really, really important note when you are moving large sums of money from the UK to Sweden, and that is that when you are moving this money, you may trigger off a system in Sweden whereby the tax people want to know where the money is coming from. But basically, any sum of money that you transfer into Sweden is going to be scrutinized. You might think that, well, I'm transferring it into a Swedish bank account. No one knows about it but me. But no, any sum over a certain amount is reported automatically by the banks to the tax agency and also the money laundering agencies. Some of the Swedish banks got in a lot of trouble some years ago and were sued massive amounts of money for a big money laundering scandal where they just didn't pick up on what was going through their own books. So therefore, they're really, really careful now. So when I moved and sold my house in 2019, I moved my money to Sweden, and moving that kind of significant sum of money triggered that system. And I immediately got contacted via phone and by letter, and I was asked to evidence where this money came from. I had to show the sale of the house, the original contract, the money going from the estate agents into my UK bank account, and then going from my UK bank account into Revolut and then to Sweden. I had to evidence the whole money trail. So if you are moving large amounts of money to Sweden, just be prepared to show all of that evidence. And just also to note, this has happened to me twice. I didn't move all of my UK money at first. I moved the majority of it, and then I moved some about 6 months later. When I moved it the second time, that again triggered the same system, and I had to go through the whole process again. It is a headache, but you can understand why they do it, because with money being online now, it's very easy to transfer it. And what they're trying to avoid is people moving large amounts of money from the proceeds of crime or tax evasion. Now, a very final, really important point is when you sell a property abroad. Now, I was very careful not to move to Sweden until I'd sold my UK house. At that point, I moved over to Sweden, I registered myself here as being tax resident in Sweden, and that way I wasn't obligated to pay any tax into the Swedish tax system, capital gains. Now, if you live in Sweden and you still own a property in the UK or anywhere else and you sell that property, you are then liable to pay tax, capital gains on the sale of that property. So in other words, if I bought a house in the UK for 100,000 and I sell it whilst I live in Sweden for 150,000, I have to pay capital gains based on the £50,000 profit that I made, subject to the Swedish requirements. So if you are selling a property in the UK, my advice is get it sold before you move here. Otherwise, any profit that you had in that property may be massively swept up in paying capital gains on the Swedish side. So there you go, there's my video of advice on moving money to Sweden when you're relocating here. Hopefully it's useful. If you've got any other experiences relevant to this, comment below and subscribe to this channel because it's all about moving to Sweden and things that you need to know. Have a look through the old videos as well because there's lots of information and videos there on getting a person number, bank ID, Swish and everything else that you need to know about this fantastic country. Thanks very much for watching, guys.